Hey folks, and welcome to another video from A Plain Truth for You and Well Healed Too. Well, I do have another special guest today. Santos Bonacci is in the house with us. He's been up here at the ranch now for how long, Santos?
1 month. Exactly.
1 month, Sunday, yeah. So we've been having a lot of great conversations and getting into a lot of esoteric knowledge. I'm learning a lot from him as he shares his great vast knowledge with all of us, and we get to enjoy what he's downloaded and shared with us all. So today we're getting into Tartarian Empire, the purging of the Tartarians, the Horde, Russian Horde, the Romanovs, all this culted history that's been erased. And what I've learned in my, I don't know, since 2007 of being a truther, an awakening, it's not what they're told, what they've told you, what they've sold you, what the public Rockefeller education has imprinted into your mind. It's what they don't tell you. It's what we find out on our own, which is the truth about flat earth, which is the truth about vaccines, which is the truth about our world today and the one world government that runs everything. So let's get into the Tartarian Empire that up until my findings are showing that up until the 1800s, maybe as late as 1820s, 1830s, the Tartarian Empire was so vast. It went all the way from China through Russia. Siberia was an empire, was the Empire of Russia, and all the way across to the United States, all the way to Oregon and Alaska. The Tartarian Empire went until the Pugachev Rebellion in 1776 and the Great Purge that looks like it ended or went all the way through to the 1830s. And then you can see, we'll show evidence in the United States where these Tartarian buildings, these incredible buildings that were allegedly built during the horse and buggy days of 10 stories of stone and incredible design, were destroyed to put in parking lots, were destroyed to put in roads. They did not want any of the remnants of the Tartarian Empire in the United States, so they literally took them down, but we still find remnants. All right, so here's Santos. He's going to give you his knowledge and his research on the Tartarians, and then we'll do a little back and forth. Santos, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, the Tartarian Empire had influence all over the world. I can see it in Australia, where I come from. I always marvelled at the beautiful buildings in Melbourne. I had a lot to do with Melbourne in my growing up in Victoria. And just recently, before I left for California, I spent 5 days in Melbourne. And my eyes were truly, truly opened, as I haven't been back there for a couple of years since I learnt about the mud floods and Tartaria, etc. And then I realized how important this empire was. I can see clearly in Melbourne because everything sort of flourished. It was founded in supposedly 1835 by John Batman. There's a road, an avenue there in Melbourne called Batman Avenue. And he purchased the land off some tribal Aborigines, etc. Usual story. Anyway, 1835 was when it was founded. Now, I've been going around Melbourne looking at some of the buildings from the 1840s, 1850s, and 1860s, and all these buildings are absolutely staggeringly glorious. Melbourne is full of glorious buildings, even though in the 70s and 80s they destroyed many of them. There was a premier called John Cain, and he was going around doing new developments all over the place, destroying these old buildings, but many remain. So I just wanted to add that, and also one more thing. Before I left for California as well, I went to a place called Gympie in Australia, in Queensland, southern Queensland, near where I lived, about an hour away from where I lived. And there's all these rumours about pyramids being in Gympie. So a friend, another flat earther, Tartarian friend I had there living there, she offered to tour Gympie with me, and I took a lot of footage. But suffice to say that I saw the pyramid stones and how they dismantled the pyramids and then laid them out in a park to make a border ornamentation sort of stonework for this park, and you can see clearly that these are old stones from a pyramid. So this is what they do. They dismantle them, use the stones for another edifice, and then rub it in your face. And they what they do is, like they did with the casing stones of the pyramids in Arabia, no? We are told that they remove them and then they use them for other buildings, etc. Well, this is how they did it. They hid the evidence in such a way. So the Gympie pyramids were destroyed and reused. The stones, we saw them everywhere. And the other thing I noticed, and I'll close with this, is that walking through Gympie, all the buildings had the ancient looking ones, Tartarian. They all had a date of around 1860, 1870. Now this is the same date that all the buildings in Melbourne went up, Sydney, Perth, and all over the world, you know, the 1870s and 1880s. There was 2 decades when all of a sudden everybody was building, and then it stopped, and no one could build these buildings anymore somehow. And they did all this without the technology we have today. You know, with cranes, we still struggle to get a building up on time. And we're still struggling to keep up with all the demand. So how it was done? Well, you know, we know these people lived in a more glorious age. So that's been destroyed, and we have new hosts, new occupants of the system. And so that's what we're dealing with, Jamie. We're dealing with a force that infiltrated. You mentioned at the start how that happened. And of course, the Jesuits would be also masterminding the whole thing, using all their various programs and institutions that work with them, such as the Masons, etc.
Yeah, and this is, you know, we're finding, I mean, look at these buildings here I'm showing on the screen here as we're talking. I mean, these are in the United States, folks. These are in Europe. These are in Moscow. These are in Italy. These are in Asia. I mean, how did they build these? I mean, what was the construction they used to erect these incredible structures that are magnificent in their designs? And they all have similar layouts. They all have very huge doors, which would validate the fact that there were giants, much larger beings than ourselves, living in those times. And also we've got to maybe get into a little bit about the Nephilim and the fallen angels that came in the 1850s, the 1870s, because that would lay the groundwork for them to take over the dynasty of the peaceful. And this is another thing we should really get into. The Great Tartarian Empire was known as the land of plenty. And as we're learning more about the land of plenty, the Tartarian Empire, they were extremely peaceful people. They all lived in harmony. They all lived together. And one of the only rules, and I'm trying to find out more research. Look at this, folks. How did they get this all underground? I mean, it's incredible. But how did they live? How did they exist for so long in peace and harmony? Well, they had one of their major rules, as far as I'm learning, is that they said if you take from the land, you must give back. They revered Mother Gaia. They revered nature, and everybody lived in peace and harmony. And what we're learning from these structures that have been taken over by the church and the religious system is that these were healing centers. These Gothic cathedrals and whatnot. How do you say it? Chartres in France.
Chartres.
Yeah, I can't even say it. But these great manifest of these incredible structures had magnetrons in them. And so think about it. So if you had a healing center and this grandiose design of these beautiful, beautiful buildings, and it was a healing center, you would come there to get healed. Well, does it make any sense that when the Romanovs, when the Romans, the Italians, the Jesuits, not the Italians, but the Jesuits, the religious factions took over and were somehow, that's another subject, how did they take out the empire? How did they take out the Tartarians during this period? But these people would go to these healing centers and get healed. Well, the church took over the healing centers, and then they said it was God, and they come into the church and they start feeling better, and they say, oh, it was God making you feel better, instead of the design of the church using magnetrons and magnets, which we're just learning about more today, about magnetic healing, were healing centers. And that's why everybody flocked there. Oh, by the way, on top of that, we're going to show these pictures that we've been showing here. They all have Wi-Fi towers on the top of them, right? They were all communication devices as well. And if you look at the structures, I'll get up pictures in a minute here. But they all have these coils that go at the top and all around the structures of these Gothic buildings and whatnot. And it shows they were Wi-Fi centers, that they were communicating. Out here, you and I went to Mendocino and went out to the coast, and we saw these structures with 300-foot poles sticking up the top on the Mendocino coast when they were erected in the 1850s and the 1860s, which also validates the California being an island, because there was no construction of any note before that time in the 1840s, 1850s. And what we have to start thinking about is, if we're told, like in California here where I grew up, that the 49ers, the San Francisco 49er football team, are named after the gold rush of 1849. That's when the 49ers came across from the Great Salt Lake and came all the way across Lake Tahoe and the Sierra Nevadas, and they found gold. And that's the story about the mass exodus from people all over the world, sailing their clipper ships all around Argentina to come all the way to San Francisco, all at once in the 1849s, 1850s, because there was gold in them dar hills in California, right? Wow. So what would make you get on a ship from China, sail all the way around? Then when you get to San Francisco, the captains of the clipper ships, the owners, would scuttle their ships and run up to Auburn, up to the Sierra Mountains, up to Sutter, where the first gold was allegedly found. And what would make you come all that way? Would it be because you had to get picks and shovels and dig into the ground to find the gold? That doesn't make any sense. And there we showed these pictures of this, I'll have to get this up in a minute, but the great temples in Utah that were supposedly starting to be built in the 1840s to the 1880s that go up 10, 20 stories of magnificent design by the Mormons. Well, how did they do that if they had horse and buggies? Because the horse and buggies had to go across the Great Salt Lake all the way to the Sierra Nevadas. And we have the story of the Donner Party trekking across and getting stuck in Lake Tahoe when they had 15 feet of snow in October, blah, 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 on horse and buggy. Yet they built these magnificent structures, these amazing structures that were already in place by the Mormons, by all these other factions that were already there. That's such a terrible, horrible story. And what about the Great Salt Lake? The Great Salt Lake has fish bones in it, just like the Salton Sea in Southern California. Why are they salt? Because it used to be an ocean, folks. Up until the 1810s, 1820s, California was an island. And the Great Salt Lake was the ocean that they couldn't get to. They had to sail from the Wasatch Mountains. If you go to the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, they go up 12,000, 14,000 feet and drop down to sea level. Well, there was a great ocean there, and then California was its own island. And then once there was a cataclysmic event of still undetermined cause from up in Wyoming, where they had a big lake apparently, it flooded 200 miles out to where the coastline of the west coast of California is. California's island extended apparently 200 miles further. And we have over 150 maps that are in the Stanford Research Library of California being an island. The Jesuits talk about California being an island. So it's all this revisionist history that we're coming to, but there is no way that California was founded on horse and buggies and were able to build these incredible, incredible structures. And here we're showing on the screen all the flags of the Tartarian Empire, which they were co-opted, and the names were co-opted. And this is why the Jesuits had to come up and take out the Tsar of Russia back in 1912, because they were too powerful, because they had too much control still. And so this is why the Jesuits came in and started World War I, and they started World War II. Look at Albert Pike prophecies from the 1890s declaring this, and they're declaring World War III will be a war, final war. The final World War III will be the elimination of the Islamic and Christian cultures for their world domination event. So that's what they have talked about and they used. And here on the screen, they're showing that directed energy weapons. This is written proof right here that the secret technology of using directed energy weapons has been available in the 1800s, well before Nikola Tesla. Again, limited information, limited stories. But here we can see that again, we've been lied to so much about everything. Here's patents on electric gun. Look at that, 1904, folks. Electric guns being used. So it's no surprise that we're being attacked with directed energy weapons. They just slow boil it out. They give it to us when they want. And then one other point, well, I'll turn it back over to you, Santos, is this word tartar. Let me get back to here if I can. And the Tartarian, let's see if I can find this here. Here, why don't you go and add to that?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So for me, Tartaria has Tara in it, the goddess. So they would have been conscious people living in harmony. All religions, there was forbearance. All religions were accepted and tolerated, and everybody had their own, way of doing things. So you'll see Muslim temples, you'll see Jewish temples, and Christian, etc., all throughout Tartaria. So, but Tara is also Torah, and so it's grounded in the torus field. It's grounded in science. It's showing you that they understand the Torah and the energy of magnetism, the torus, rotating torus fields. So probably, I see that connection when I think of Tartaria. I also think of Arya, as in Aryan, children of the Aryan fifth root race. So it is said that we are of the fifth root race, which is the Aryan. Before that was the fourth, the Atlantean, then the Lemurian, then the Hyperboreans, and the first root race was the Polarians. So I see Tartaria as a remnant of that, showing that they had knowledge of Taurus, the Torah, Tartar. Tartar is also in reference to the underworld, Tartarus. I remember being a very diligent Christian growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, and in the book of Revelation you would often read about Tartarus, where the devil and Satan and all the demons and evil people are perishing. So again, it's a word for me that symbolizes all the world, the torus field, or the torus that we live in. We live inside a massive torus field which we call the solar system. And, so that would be Tartaria. It's a Taurus, and we are the Aryan race, and Tara is the goddess, So I see a lot in that word. For me, there's more to it than just a pretty name, although I love the name Tartaria. It sounds just like, utopia to me, or it has that ring to it as though it was a place where, humanity really, really flourished. I just want to say also that the Hare Krishnas have been saying from their ancient books that we're in the middle of a mini golden age, which began in the 1500s. So I always keep that in the back of my mind, knowing that their books, their Hindu books, are very, very reliable, when it comes to history. So why are we seeing so much turmoil if we're supposed to be in a mini golden age? And I believe the Renaissance was in history, the history that we get anyway, the Renaissance is alluding to that time, the last real perfect time when humanity had it all together and we were still living, according to custom and doing things traditionally. And then the change came, and everything for me is post-Renaissance, which coincides with this prophecy of the Golden Age beginning 500 years ago, or a mini Golden Age. So that's what I, conjure up when I think of Tartaria. I think of the system in the Bible, in the last book of Judges. It says there that the people of Israel did not have any judges, nor did they have kings, and they did all according to their own hearts. So they didn't have this system of law, in other words, kings and paying tributes and taxes, and everybody knew the law, and they were free. It was actually, pointing to the fact that that is the pristine way of living, and I think Tartaria absolutely symbolizes all that. That's why all the memory of it has been wiped from the books, Even in the Russian Revolution, they destroyed what remained of Tartaria in Russia because it just wouldn't go down. For hundreds of years, the Russians were just too, they were more urban and, more rural than urban, and they kept their sovereignty. So what they did was they destroyed that portion of Tartaria that was left, and they made a state just east of Moscow, which is called Tartary, I think it is. Jamie, I don't know. Yeah, I forget the name exactly, but it has Tartaria in it, and that's how it's been reduced. It's still there, but it's only like a couple of 100 square miles, and must have been a great humiliating defeat, and you know, a real injustice to the beautiful world that was.
Yes, Santos, and again, I mean, this is just uncovering, discovering, rediscovering. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
No.
We're just learning this occulted revisionist history, and this book, I can only find it in Russian by Mr. Fomenko and Nozovsky, the Epoch of the 13th Century. And what these statisticians, mathematicians, historical researchers wrote about in very extensive detail was that the history was only been written since the 12th century. The 12th century is all written record, according to these gentlemen, that all the written history only goes back to the 12th century. So you start with 12th century AD. They get into the Christ event. They get into the whole history of everything, but it's all being only known since the 12th century of what we know today. Everything before that has been made up or co-opted of the truth to what we know today. So if that's true from the 12th century to the 19th century, we're only talking 700 years of history. 700 years of history as opposed to 3000 BC, right? So what we're talking about is 5,000 years minus 700 years. So 4,300 years of, excuse me, folks, bullshit. Right?
Yeah.
So I want to read to you a little bit about the division of the remains of the Russian horde. Now, the Russian hordes, remember, hoarding is a bad thing if you're hoarding and whatnot. Well, that used to be the name of the empire, the land of plenty, the benign empire that governed, not governed, but helped the people, assisted them over history up until they were taken out, up until 1820s or so, starting in the 1776. And that's what I'm going to get into. Remember, 1776, United States was founded. Well, you know, and then we know that not many know that February 21st, 1871, the Corporation USA, also known as Washington, D.C. What does District of Columbia mean, folks? Nobody knows. That they founded the corporation. But before that, 1776, on May 1st, Adam Weishaupt, the Freemason founder, founded the United States in May 1st, 1776, and then July 4th is when they tell us to celebrate. But here, listen to this. Up until the 18th century, there existed a vast Moscow Tartary, a gigantic fragment of the former empire. According to Encyclopedia Britannica of 1771, Moscow Tartary was the largest country in the world. It is depicted on various maps of the 18th century. Moscow Tartary originated in the middle reaches of Volga. This Moscow was not far from the border with Moscow Tartary. The town of Tobolsk was pronounced its capital. The name Tobol was underlined on several maps. The Bible medieval Russia was referred to as Rosh, Meshke, and Tubal. Excuse my pronunciations. Ros, Moscow, and Tobol. Moscow Tartaria spanned the Urals, Siberia, Central Asia, the Far East, Alaska, and North America. Think about that, folks. It's vast and huge. The conflict between Moscow Tartaria and the Romanov Russia, originally small in size, ended in the second half of the 18th century with the famous alleged peasant war against the Pugachevs. It was known as the Pugachev Rebellion, 1776. The Romanovs succeeded in agreeing peace separately with Turkey and defeating the Great Tartary. Only after the European immigrants who had settled on the Atlantic seaboard of North America ventured west inland over the continent. For decades, they seized the North American territories of Moscow Tartary, left without any government authority. How about this revisionist history, folks? Today, this has been beautifully but incorrectly narrated on Hollywood movies about the, quote, very noble white frontiersmen frontiersmen, and the very bad Indians. This is the manifest destiny, the 1850 contract with the settlement of the Mexicans, where the Europeans came and took over California, blah, blah, blah. As a result, in 1776, after the defeat of the Pugachev, the United States of America emerged. With the Romanovs, they voraciously and speedily sliced and diced the vast territories of the Moscow Tartary, Ural, Siberia, and the Far East. In America, Alaska and Oregon was ceded to the Romanovs, the rest of North America to the USA. And out here in Mendocino County on the west coast, northwest coast of California, we have Fort Bragg and others that were supposedly allegedly settled by the Russians. And if you're talking flat Earth, and what was the senator up in Alaska? I could see Russia from Alaska. She famously said, I can't think of her name right now, little ditz, but she was actually correct. So it makes total sense that the Russians would came down and settled on the west coast here, because it's connected right to Alaska, right across, and that they were moving all the way from the west to the east and the east to the west. The rest of North America to the USA. After failing to maintain these beautiful, bountiful lands distant from St. Petersburg and unwilling to obey their usurpers, both Oregon and Alaska were given away to the U.S. for a notably paltry sum. What was the sum? Where was the contract? How come that's not known? The very fact of the existence of Moscow Tartary up until the end of the 18th century and the division of its vast territories between the conquerors was wiped clean from the history books, both in the Old and the New worlds. Up until now, the native Russian population of America is being persistently forced to forget their language and their past. In the 18th century, there existed another Tartar state, the independent Tartary, with its capital in Samarkand. It was another large splinter of the Russian horde. Unlike Moscow Tartary, the fate of this state is known. It was conquered by the Romanovs in the middle of the 19th century. Samarkand, the capital of the independent Tartary, was seized by the Romanovs' army in 1868. Before the defeat of the Pugachev, the entire Siberia was on the whole a country independent of the Romanovs. As a matter of fact, there were a number of states. Only after the victory of the Pugachevs, the Romanovs began to place on the map of Russia the country's names famous in the old Russian history. The country's provinces of the Mongol Empire. Now, a lot of this Tartarian conversation goes back to Mongolia with Genghis Khan, who apparently, as I'm understanding, revisionist history here, that Genghis Khan was one of the rulers, if you like the word ruler. What do rulers do? They rule you. That presided over the vast empire from Mongolia, which is completely erased from the history books as well. So these names of the old imperial provinces were on the Russian coat of arms. After the breakup of the empire, the Romanovs began the rewriting of the history of Russia. In particular, it was necessary to relocate these names from Western Europe to some place far off into the wilderness, which was done. But only after the victory over Pugachev and the Pugachev rebellion, notably, it was done rather quickly. This is what I want to get into, folks. If you researchers out there, how did they take over? Did they use directed energy weapons? How did they take over this vast empire, the Romanovs? The Romanovs began to replace the coats of arms of the Russian cities and regions only in the second half of the 18th century. Middle 1700s, folks, 1770s to 1780s. On the whole, in 1781, the change of the coat of arms began 6 years after the victory over the Pugachev, the last independent Hordian Tsar, or the military commander of the Tsar of Moscow, Tartary. So do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it looks like this is a case of organizations seeing the potential for power back in those days, and it seems to be that bloodline families with a lot of money are behind all of this. They back them, they back these takeovers. And you can see that clearly with America, for instance. You see very wealthy Roman families that were putting their money in funds, what they call the fondi in Venice and in Genova at the time of this so-called discovery. And what happened was you'll see that the families who financed these takeovers, their names are still all over the place. The biggest backer was the Columbus family, or what's known in Italy, in Rome, as the Colonna family, as in the Latin word for column, and their insignia is a column. Christopher Columbus was a Colon. His name was Cristobal Colon. So that comes to Collins in English. And the Collins family is far more powerful than the Rockefellers in this country of America, or the United States, I should say. They own Columbia Pictures, District of Columbia, together with the Farnese family, because the Pentagon is modeled after their palace in Rome, the Farnese family. And the other family is the Orsini family. The Orsini and the Colonna family were fighting for papal power all throughout the Middle Ages. And by decree, a pope stopped them from shedding so much blood to get to power. These families were at each other's throats for hundreds of years. And then they got together at this time, around the Renaissance, before the Renaissance, when they realized they could just destroy Tartary and the balance and harmony that it was, and take over. So these names, you see, when you see Columbia Pictures, the Knights of Columbia, the District of Columbia, the State of Columbia in Canada, the Country of Columbia in South America, this is all their holdings. This is all their names are on those countries, you know, the Collins family. It's the same family. And then you'll see the Farnese family, Pallavicini family. And so these people are the ones, the Farnese and the Borgia family are the ones who created the Jesuits. Now the Borgias, they are the ones who carved up the Americas. That's the Pope who divided South America between Spanish-speaking on the west and Portuguese on the east. They marked a line which is, I think, about, I don't know, 1,500 miles west of Rome, and then they carved up the Americas. The Borgia family. This is the family who, with the Farneses, created the Jesuits. And then this is where it all ties into the flat Earth, Jamie, because it was the Farnese Pope whom Copernicus dedicated his book to.
On his deathbed.
Lo and behold, he dedicated his Pope to Alessandro Farnese, Pope Paul III, in about 1542, just 2 years after the Jesuits were created. So what they destroyed is not just Tartaria and balance, Jamie. They destroyed and went after the true cosmology of the Earth, which is geocentric and astrological. And they attacked our holy sciences and syncretism. They destroyed a lot more than just, you know, architectural and political harmony. They absolutely went after our truth. You know, our diets changed as well. You know, they became more gross, whereas we were much more, you know, toward liquid and breath, you know, when people were surviving on just few nourishments of the solid type, you know, just leaves and herbs and fruits. But the biggie is the stationary flat Earth. They want us to be moving. They want us to be godless. They want us to be in a world where everything is uncertain. We're flying around who knows where. And yet we never see any new stars in the skies to suggest, you know, and give us evidence that we're actually moving through space. You know, no parallax, no distortion of constellations, no new stars, no brightness and dimming of stars that we're leaving behind, and brightening of stars which we are coming toward, not in thousands and thousands of years of recorded history. So how they did this was they created a revolution, and it's called the Copernican Revolution. And it has had so much influence over people's minds that they've been taken off their stationary created Earth. and they've been made to, you know, be upside down and spinning and all over the place. And so this is how, if you change people's cosmology where they don't know where they are, you know, it's very, very sad. And so people are lost, and they're lost because they don't know their location. And, you know, I mean, there's no real location, I mean, but it's they've got to know how it works. They've got to know that this is a world which functions on the balance of nature and magnetism. It is a purely magnetic universe, and the effect of it is electrical. You know, what we see in the solid world is electrical effect, whereas the spiritual world is all magnetic. It pulsates and radiates, whereas the physical world vibrates. And those are two different you know, energies. And so what they did was they took out the system of free energy, which was magnetic, not electric. And hence they developed the electrical grid, which you pay for, and the free energy devices, they were all outlawed, of course, and slowly phased out. And so now we're coming back to free energy. We're starting to realise with people like Schallberger and all those great avant-garde scientists, Tesla, etc., that we can actually harness the longitudinal wave, which is the radiation pulse wave, and now pulse weapons are coming back. They've always been there, as you said, Jamie. They've had patents since the 1800s, so the technology has always been there. It's just that what we're allowed to, you know, witness and experience in our world has been limited for a reason. And let's hope that those limitations are going to come off, you know, with the new energy, the new wave of energy that's coming through. I believe that the new wave of energy that's coming through is magnetic. Now with your magnetic healing, Jamie, I'm sure we're bringing back lots of, you know, ancient techniques of using this powerful, powerful healing protocol to humanity, where the understanding how to use magnets can, you know, restore our health and revitalize our aura fields. You know, we're being depleted, and we have holes in our holy auras, and that's what holes. The word "hole" comes from holy, and the opposite of holy is to have holes in your makeup. You know, to not be complete and integrated and know who you are. Know thyself, you know, is the ancient motif. So by knowing yourself and knowing that you are magnetic, and to resonate with that magnetic pulse is so much more important than identifying with the physical, vibratory, electrical world of effects. You know, transitory, unstable, and unreliable. You know, magnetism is always reliable. There's a scientist out there called John Mawelski who says that magnetism is 10 billion times more powerful than electricity. According to, he uses Maxwell's and I don't know who else, who's the other guy, Maxwell and the other electric pioneer. He uses
Watson?
No, no, there's another one, but I'll remember it in a minute. But anyway, he uses their equations. They discovered this hundreds of years ago, and Sri Yukteswar, the great Hindu cosmologist and teacher, he said that when divine magnetism returns, as they had in Tartaria with their beautiful turrets and tors and towers and domes which would harvest this magnetic energy, then when we come into that, we will be divine. You know, we will come back to a divine world. And just one more thing, you know, you mentioned how they were healing centers, Jamie. They were, and they were more than that. You know, they were also a consciousness altering edifices, because they were constructed according to the shapes of constellations and you know, archetypal blueprint transcendental forms. You see, these temples, You could imagine them being created somehow like we have with these 3D printers, right? You don't have crews of thousands of slaves building pyramids. That's a Santa Claus story. Okay. It was technology, and there's evidence that the technology is there because you can see the cut marks, you can see the advanced stuff that we still can't do today. Okay, so it was technology, and the technology was laser, Caesar, etc., and beyond Caesar. You know, so they would have used this technology, and it would have been pulse technology on the standing wave and magnetic. No moving parts, no wearing parts, just pure magnetism. So, you know, this is what Tartaria, which I see as Tortoria, Taurus and the Taurus fields, rotating magnetic fields. You know, Tora is backwards for rotate. So you can see that rotate is in the word Tartaria, you know. Yeah, there you go. So, hand it over to you.
I learned a lot from you. Thank you, Santos. Yeah, and I want to add to that what my dear friend Bruce Hillier came up with. Washington, D.C., we talked about the District of Columbia. What's Colum? And he was getting into. And remember, all these terms and everything there's double-edged swords. There's many, many meanings. And what I discovered, uncovered, and rediscovered was that Colum, Augustine de Chardin Colum, I believe, again, it was the 17th, 18th century. He came up with electromagnetism, that the earth had ether, the air, ether. And Santos and I were talking about this last night. Maybe we can add to it. But he came up with electromagnetism and rediscovered electromagnetism. And then J.J. Thomson, some 60 years later, took what Augustine de Chardin Colum had found. Colum was a civil engineer in England, and he learned how to kickstart it and make it into perpetual electromagnetic energy. AC, alternating current, and then Nikola Tesla took that information and made the Tesla coil. So Colum, District of Colum, could actually be related to electromagnetic energy. And that ties into our voting or our volting, where we go to the polls and we charge the candidate. Candid means white light, white glory. And we go to the polls to charge the candidate to elect them or electrify them. And so it's all been made into this masculine, male, dominant Mars pushing out. Magnetism is pulling back. It's the attraction principle, folks. It is about bringing us back into homeostasis. And this is why this biomagnetism is so important for everybody to get their heads around about this healing protocol. That's simple. It's elegant. It's the feminine divine. So what does negative magnetic energy do? Well, it increases your cellular oxygen. Is that good? Well, I'd think so. But if it's a masculine, it decreases your oxygen. What if it's pulling fluids and gases into you? It's good. Fluid retention encourages deep restorative sleep, fights infection, promotes mental acuity, supports biological healing, reduces inflammation, normalizes acid base. Because we've been acidic, we've been pushed into our acidic male pushing out of homeostasis. Magnetism brings us back in. Maga, magnificent. Magnetron, magical, all these words with mag again. Make America great again. See, he's mocking us with mag, right? Mm-hmm. It's right in front of our faces, you know, and for those with eyes to hear, or ears to hear, and eyes to see, it's right in front of us. Reduces, dissolves fatty deposits, relieves, stops pain. All of these are positive, folks, but they made the word, just like they make black a negative, they made negative a negative. But what creates life? Two negatives. At the very base of our DNA, two negatives make a positive. All right? Two positives do not make a negative.
Can I just make a comment on that North Pole and South Pole, brother? According to Ken Wheeler's work, North Pole is blue shift, right? So he doesn't see magnetism as poles. He doesn't believe they exist. But they do, because the field is blue shift, red shift. South Pole is red shift. So he points his seeds to the North Pole, his magnets, the North Pole to his seeds, and he gets much better yield with his seeds with the North Pole. So it's blue shift, it's compression, it's that loving, cooler, or the compression, whereas redshift is radiating. So they're two different modalities. They both heal, but it's all about, if you can understand it's redshift, blue shift, you'll have much more understanding of magnetism.
Well, yeah, and will you get into a little bit more, because I found it fascinating, our discussion we had between like why police cars have red and blue on them and the whole red-blue. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the electrical world is a wave world, and the wave polarizes at redshift and blue shift. Simple as that. All torus fields are redshift, blue shift. The top is blue, the bottom is red, always. Now, this is why you have red pill, red blood, blue blood. Violets are red, roses are red, violets are blue, Republicans are red, Democrats are blue, neither of them gives a hoot about you. But these colours are the colours that denote polarity in the electrical world. Everything is polarised thusly. Look at the rainbow. One end is red, the other end's got the blues. The rainbow knows that. Your torso, which is a torus field, which is a rotating electrical magnetic field, it is blue shift at the top. The top of the torso is the throat chakra, blue. The bottom of the torus torso is red. So you see, red is always below. It's infernal. It's the colour of, oh, hell, yeah? And the bottom chakra is nicknamed Sodom, yeah, where sodomy happens. Sodom, and then Gomorrah is the sexual chakra, the second chakra. These are rotating magnetic fields, you see. And so red is always associated with that earthly sensation down below, and then the green heart chakra is the door, the portal, to go up to the throat, the blue, which is the colour of the heavens. And then you enter the violet at the very, very top, and you are at the crown of glory, you know. So the rainbow, everything you see is redshift, blue shift, and that's denotes the wave. It's a polarized phenomena, you know, whereas magnetism is not, is a unified field. It's what they call where entangled particles are meeting, you know, because it's a field. There's no particles, they don't exist. The world is a pulse wave world. It's not a particle wave world. Walter Russell taught us this. It's all frequencies. There are no particles. They don't exist. What exists is pulses. And Bruce Cathy, a New Zealand scientist, also did a lot of work into dimensions and energy. He says that the universe is pulsating, and it's in the gaps where there is a nothingness where the magic happens. But because we are so fixed and our eyes and our senses are too slow to see the gaps of the pulses, pretty much like your fluorescent lights, you know, or our AC lighting, it's actually flashing, okay? We can't see that flash because the eye is too slow to pick that up. It's not a continual DC flow of light, you see? And this is how the universe is coming to us. It pulsates. Pierluigi Iguina, the great Italian genius, he also said he studied the sun for 30 years and the magnetism of the sun and how it rotates above the stationary earth. And he says it's in the ether, rotating over the earth and creating solar energy. And this is the magnetism that he's talking about, that is in the ether. You know,
and the weather. You were talking about ether weather yesterday.
Same word. Yeah, you just put a W in front of ether and you get weather.
And what were the other ones you were coming up with?
All the elements. Water, it's another way of saying weather, you know. Ether, air. Air has weather in it because it creates the weather. It's the magnetic pulse, which, because it radiates, it generates a wave, you see. Because as it propagates through the medium, whether it's the ether or the air or fire, whichever element, water, the waves come from pulses, you see, and they have redshift, blue shift phenomena associated to them. Whereas magnetism is white light, it does not vibrate. as Walter Russell, showed. It's all about frequencies, and there are no particles. Pierluigi Aguina said that the sun has a heart in its core, and it beats at the same rate as the human heart. There you go. And he was a colleague of Marconi. Stationary earther. I don't know whether he knew it was flat or not, but this man, he actually proves. You can go to his videos on YouTube and see him in his laboratory proving in the laboratory with an experiment. Okay, we don't have George Airy anymore. We don't have Sagnac and all these guys who did their interferometer tests, but we do have Pierluigi Aguina. And I've made a video on my YouTube channel about Pierluigi and how he says that the Earth is stationary, and you can prove it with strobe lights. You can attach a strobe light to the Earth magnetic field and to an antenna in the Earth, and then he made an antenna pointing up into the heavens, capturing the sun's rotating field, and he shows in the laboratory with strobe lights that the rotating shadows around his laboratory prove that the Earth is stationary and that the ether is turning above our heads.
And go as season. You were talking about seasons. I asked you how the name sun came about.
Yeah, well, I see that as the word sun is in there, of course, denoting the sun, the bringer of all the 12 seasons of the year, which we call 4 seasons. They are the astrological seasons. And so the sea is the water. The sun is watery. It is hydrogen. And it is swimming in the waters of heavens. The canopy above our heads, which is the waters above in Scripture. And it is the firmament. And it has its ecliptic placed in the firmament, as it says in Psalms. It's like a bridegroom in its tent. And it goes from the east to the west. And it has its course. It has its trajectory that it must follow, and it brings its light to the world, and it energizes the world through water, which is weather. See, the sun is a field perturbator. It's perturbating the field, creating light. Light doesn't travel, it just perturbates the ether.
Well, yeah, and so electromagnetism is a three-sided coin. Right? We have electromagnetism, we have electric, which is Apollo, which is Thoth, which is creative principle, which is wisdom, which is the male principle, which is just shooting your sperm out in every direction with no content to it whatsoever. Isis, the moon, the feminine divine, Mother Gaia. She's the attraction principle. She's what gives form to the life. She's love. She's the ultimate giver of life and the birther. And this is what they've hidden from us with the male patriarchal society that the Jesuits created. The Men in Black is a movie about the Jesuits, for those of you who don't know. V for Vendetta is a movie about the Jesuits that you don't know. And this all ties back into the flat earth, because if you're understanding that we have these realms of these different 9 dimensions, what they're trying to do in the universe as we go through the Plato great year of the Kali Yuga, the Yuga cycles, as we're leaving the Kali Yuga cycle into the Dwapara cycle. This is fallen knowledge that has been lost. The Dark Ages were only 500 years ago, right? So we only had, the church got to tell you what was truth. If you were a heretic, they burned you at the stake. If you want to get into how evil these people are, read about the Spanish Inquisition. Read about cutting, what drawn and quartered means, where they would literally cut your guts open and let it spill while you're still alive. I mean, these guys were torture specialists. And what they wanted to take away from us, the knowledge of who we are. So in a round ball spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, traveling at 1,000 miles a second, going at 600,000 miles an hour around the solar system, around the Milky Way, yet the stars never move. What Carl Sagan are telling us is that we're just one of billions and billions and billions in a tiny corner of the galaxy, something unimportant at the speed of light expansion. So it tells us we're not anything important. We don't matter. We're just one of billions and billions. That's the story they've told us now since the 1850s to the 1870s, when the Nephilim came down and they started taking over the entire systems that we have, the governing, the legal, the monetary systems, the money, one eye system. One thing I just want to bring up on a little sidebar here, coming up into Vision 2020. 2020 is perfect vision. Now remember, if you studied the Jesuits and whatnot, they have the one eye, in a land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? And that's on your playing cards. You have the one-eyed Jack and whatnot, right? Why do they have that? Because we're living in the blind. We're living in the darkness. We can't see the light. Well, what's 2020? 2020 is perfect vision. And that's their 2020. And I highly, highly hope people will really start to understand and also get into the astrology of 2020. On the summer solstice, first time this has happened in a long time, we have a conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn is hard lessons learned. It's your father time. It's death. It's about taking things apart. And if you're not going to learn your lesson, here's a brick wall to hit until you learn your lessons. And it's generally learning the hard way, but you get through things faster by doing it that way. And that's how we seem to have to learn our lessons the hard way. Jupiter is expansion. It's bringing you to the higher consciousness. It's about long-term expansion, and having these two conjunct, these two outlying luminaries. And the word planet is plain T. Just like extraterrestrial means extra lands, right? ET, extra lands. Plain T means plain terrestrial, planet. Get it? We're on a plane, aeroplane, sea level, plate tectonics. They're telling you the truths, and just go out and look at the ocean and you can see it's flat. Just get up in the plane and you can see it's flat. Trust your own senses, folks. And what Rudolf Steiner says is we're going in now into the super senses. And the super senses are leaving the physical senses behind as we become light beings, entering the Dwarpa, leaving the Iron Age into the Bronze Age towards our enlightenment, that we're going into a much more airy time. Aquarius is air, it's Saturn. So they're telling us it's going to be hard lessons learned, but it's going to be of the mind. And what Steiner said was we're going to be going into the five senses, leaving the physical senses to inspiration, intellectualism, intuition, creativity, and wisdom. But it's not going to be a time of grounding, folks. You're not going to feel real secure in these great times of change. This historically is one of the greatest times of change in the history of man, and we're here for it. But it's darkness that we're dealing with, the darkest of darkness. This is the end of darkness, folks. It's the end. It's over. Whatever, 5,000 years or just 700 years, whatever it is, this is the end of us unknowing. Now we're seeing the light. It's the dawn of the light, but it isn't bright yet. It isn't totally light, but those of us that are seeing the dawn of light, we're seeing this consciousness rising. And what is consciousness? It's of the mind. We have to mine our minds for the gold that's within. It's not going to be without. But in the knowing, you're going to be a little bit discomforted because you're going to know and all your friends are not. And all those that talk about they not getting it, don't expect them to get it in this lifetime, folks, because they're not. All you can do is plant seeds. And when you plant those seeds, what you got to be knowing about is how seeds grow. Seeds have every knowledge of everything that's ever been of its existence and everything it's going to be. We have to become seeds. But all for your seeds, what do you got to want to do? You got to be wanted to be replanted into the earth, kept in the dark, until you're watered and fertilized until you become the sun again. But you're the most important part of the entire process of the growth of humanity. And that's where we are right now. We're the seeds. And so with that, we are seeding the Akashic record. So in the future generations, as I'm seeing it, once we seed the Akashic record is the ancient Vedic teachings that everything is known and will be known is in the Akashic record. So we're seeding the Akashic record with all this information, the great contributions with Santos and some of these others, great researchers. We're seeding the Akashic record. So in the future generations that become more intuits, that become more of a knowing, just knowing, they will be able to tap into this information that we're seeding today in the Great Library. And the Great Library is being brought up again with this knowledge. And so the work is very important, but don't expect to get the credit, what I call the echo. Don't put it out there and expect people to jump over and say, hey, yeah, you're right, the earth is flat. Hey, yeah, you're right, we've been lied to all these times, because they have been have been professionally programmed. All the schools and what the Rockefeller education systems has since the 1870s have been brought up to dumb us down and numb us down and to form us into these beings that are just obedient slaves who just do what they're told. They look on this black screen and they say, oh, I read it on a screen, so it must be true. And they're getting rid of books. So as soon as they turn off the screens or make it inaccessible, what are you left with is knowledge. Well, you're going to have to become into it. You're going to have to meditate. You're going to have to find your inner self. And this is what I get into, is why I think these directed energy weapons, these lasers, are all being turned on us right now. It's making us focus on energy, subtle, universal energy. It can be used to harm. Think of the word pharmacy, folks. What's the root word? Harm. What's the root word of pill? Ill. All right? It's all Western medicine. Take a pill, cut it out, radiate it. We'll treat the disease, never prevent it, because we got to make money, because it's a capitalist capitalizing system. And look at where we are today. We become slaves to the system. To break free is hard, folks, but until you can grow your own food, until you know have your own power, until you have your own water systems, you're not free, because you're going to be dependent on them, where you have no idea where your water, food, or energy comes from. And so you're going to have to vote or vote for those in power that you're never going to meet, never going to know. Think about this one guy named Trump. What is the Trump card in bridge? It's the last card played that wins the game. Gabriel's trumpet, Genesis 17:4, the 7 trumpets, right? Trump has the gold towers. What's the new $100 bill on the right side? It's all in gold with the Declaration of Independence written in cursive writing, the second paragraph talking about abolish government. Well, we're $23 trillion in current debt. I was in finance for 20 years. And all these, I can't believe that all my finance buddies are just drinking the Kool-Aid, say, yeah, it's going to be ugly when it crashes. Yeah, it's going to be much worse than the Great Depression. Yeah, we've never been in this much debt to our children and their future. And nobody cares. Nobody seems to even care until it happens. We've already got a huge homeless problem in California, Washington, Oregon, and around the country. And we're not even crashing the markets yet. So until you get back to your common unity, your community, start saving your seeds. You know, why did Bill Gates from hell build the Svalbard, Norway seed vault, where he took all the heirloom seeds around the world and put them in a vault in the glaciers of Norway back in 2007? Well, what are they doing now? They're coming out with the meatless Beyond Meat, meatless meat that's made from a petri dish. And this is really critical for people to understand. This new Beyond Meat that came public and went up 290% the first day of trading, the biggest move it's had, any kind of IPO, initial public offering stock has had. And then Tyson Foods announced they're getting into the meatless petri dish, and they're selling it as to the vegans as meatless. And the way they do this is because because the process of making this, you take a chicken thigh, a cell, you take a chicken leg, a cell, or whatever, and you clone it in the petri dish, and you can self-replicate this cloning until you get it to a process that's below the level of FDA, USDA requirements of what the meat, what to be called meat, would have to be. So it's really based on meat and chicken and beef, but because it's under the USDA, FDA requirements, and they don't even regulate this stuff, they can call it meatless. And all the vegans and vegetarians are jumping down, hey, it tastes like meat, I enjoy this, it's protein, it's garden-based. No, it's made from a petri dish. But what to critically understand about the future of our pea food and our mutant food is it doesn't cost anything for these guys to make this fake food coming out, this faux food, because it's made from a self-replicating petri dish. All the farmers are going away. Why do you think they flooded out the Midwest this year with all the massive water, where some 40% of the acres didn't get replanted this year? What is the future of food, fake food? What does this fake food do to the synthesizing transhumanist aspects? If we are what we eat, what is this going to do to humanity? What is this going to do to the future of our children? What is this going to do to all of us? And then also, let me finish the rant here, because I'm putting out another video about the mass vaccination, mandatory vaccinations just been declared in California. They just passed 2 laws the other day by Governor Newsom, went to Jesuit school, that says that the United States, or California, will no longer allow doctors to write exemptions for vaccines. Now, the U.S. medical world ranks 38th out of 38th in modern countries in quality of care. but number one in cost. And the state is mandating that doctors no longer have the authority to determine what might be at risk for vaccines for children, even though they've paid out over $4.5 billion from the National Vaccine Injury Compensation. $4.5 billion have been paid out for children that have died, that have been severely injured and crippled from vaccines. And they're taking the power away from the doctors to determine that vaccines are unsafe for this child. And they're making it Orwellian. This is the state of Orwell. I mean, this is incredible that people are not more uprising, but now we're seeing the mother bear come out. And it's really interesting that California is the bear country, right? We have the bear as our symbolism, you know, because that was the bear revolution that started the Europeans from taking out the Mexicans. That's why we have a bear flag. So, and also Lake Tahoe is known as the Great Mother Bear, which matches the sky with Ursa. Is it Ursa Major, the Great Bear? Yep. And so all of this ties into why it's California, why it's happening here. But the mothers were chaining themselves. I put up a video. The mothers were chaining themselves to the Sacramento courthouses and the judiciary offices, not allowing people to get in. They will not allow their children to be abused anymore. And the mother bear is rising. And I said there's two things that are going to happen when this great revolution of change is happening. One, when women start stepping up and saying, you're not doing this to my child. We're seeing that now. And two, when women stop dyeing their hair. Coal tar ash is used as a carcinogen in dyes in hair. Why do you think there's so many issues with instability in people that are taking dyes in their hair and not knowing? Because it's a carcinogen. It's going right into the follicles, into your brain by design to make you crazy, to make you irrational, to make you unstable. So there's options now, myhairprint.com. Santos and I and Mari here, we all got a kit. And Santos, maybe you can talk a little bit about myhairprint.com. But this is the answers, folks. This is the other thing, and then I'll turn it back over to Santos, is one thing I've learned in my 62 years of existence here is living out in nature as I do now, is nature balances. She will not give you just hitting you on the back of the head without giving you answers of how to stop getting hit on the back of the head. She will not give you hard lessons without giving you love too. She will not give you the darkness without giving you the candles to light into the darkness. And once light goes into darkness, it is never darkness again. It is your shadow. Own it. It is not darkness anymore because you've shown your light into that darkness. Darkness cannot put out light. Only light can extinguish darkness. So folks, be the light, be a torch in this great, great time. It's not about you, it's about us. And if we can start the process rolling, the ball rolling, and be the seed, our children and their children's children will be the fertilizers, will be the water, will be the harvesters. And then one last thing, which I don't think we've talked about yet, is how astrology and agriculture works. So do you remember when Aries was the beginning of the new growing season, right? So in April 1st, right, the beginning of the new season, we have Aries. And what's Aries? It looks like a sprig that's growing out of the ground, right? And then what's the next one? Gemini or Taurus. What does Taurus do? It plows the fields. And what does Gemini do? It seeds and it harvests until we get to Virgo, which is the sheath, which is the wheat, which is the harvest in abundance. So even in astrology, it says get back to the lands, folks. Get back to knowing your sources. Get back to understanding where things come from, because until you do, you don't have your power to make change. Until you can control your own destiny, you don't have the power to change. And that means that maybe unplugging from the scenery, unplugging from these computers, unplugging from the world just to get back to nature. Get on your knees, get your head below your heart. Have some reverence for the earth that gives us life. You take the H from earth, you put it in the front, and it now becomes heart. Your middle word of earth and heart is art. Be creative.
Oh, beautiful. I can't really add to that except for to encourage people to perhaps go back and listen to it again. You know, it's urgent times. It's going to be a great ascension of human consciousness. It's coming, and we are in the line to receive it. You know, we're here for this moment. That's what we've been waiting for many lifetimes, and it's going to be beautiful. So we don't want to be on the wrong side, you know. We want to be aligned, you know, with good forces, loving forces, and the universe, which is built on love and truth. So we need to be ready, make out just ignore what's coming and proceed with everyday eating, drinking, buying and selling until the flood comes. We want to be diligent, disciplined and devoted, the 3 Ds. Devoted to the ascension process. We don't want to be descending, bad habits, addictions, etc. They'll take us away from this everlasting glory that's coming, and it will distract us. Many people are being distracted. They're being pulled by the forces of darkness and keeping people, keeping people from being inspired and regaining their full power. Power only comes, when we are worthy of that power. And people are abusing the power that they have rather than using their power in good ways. So, and once you do that, then it creates a loop and it cycles back into your magnetic field, and you gain more power by your honourable deeds, by your virtue. So that's what I'd like to leave with the listeners. Thank you, Jamie.
And thank you, Santos. And here I just want to show, see the Vision 2020, the right to sight. Now, have you heard about Vision 2020, anybody? Have you seen that the UN logo is the Vision 2020 for the future? And the United States Command Vision for 2020, they've got a laser coming down. I mean, this is all by design. I mean, they show us what they're doing. But one thing I didn't point out, I want to close the loop on, is when I was talking about the wagon trains coming out west, the great 49ers, the gold rush. What would make people come from around the world and scuttle their clipper ships? Well, the only thing that would make me come across, and here we see from 1847 to 1877, the Mormons, which are a faction of the Jesuits, folks. What was the guy's name? Brigham Young and Smith. Smith was a womanizer and everything, and they came and built these magnificent temples in 1850 with horse, buggy, and wagons. And then the Great Salt Lake. Well, this cataclysmic event, as I am understanding and putting together, was the only way that this could happen, the Great Gold Rush, and people come around all the world, is if there was a great flood. As if California was no longer an island, as if the gold was literally sitting above ground and you could come up to the Sierra Nevadas and literally pick the gold off the ground. That would get me to come across the world to pick it up off the ground. If they told me how to use pick and shovels and stuff, I wouldn't be interested. So we're just putting this together. And also I did a piece on the 1919 San Francisco Great Exposition, where Henry Ford came out and they built this elaborate and massive buildings, including a 47-story Temple of Jewel, and all these magnificent buildings that were torn down after the 1919 Great Exposition to put in Christie Field all these cookie cutter box houses on fields. Why did they tear down these magnificent structures? Well, because they didn't want examples of their buildings, of how they did it, right? And so but to think about this for a sec, folks. When was the California earthquake? 1906. Look at this, folks. This is Gabriel drumming his trumpet facing out to the east. Clarion call telling everything. These are Wi-Fi towers, folks. This is ancient technology. This is what they've had for a very, very long time. So the 1906 earthquake comes along, and then by 1919, they're hosting the Great World Exhibition with all these 47 acres with 47-story buildings that they tore down. Henry Ford had a car manufacturing plant in there in 1919. Are you kidding me? What kind of technology would do that? If you had a great earthquake in 1906, were you going to host a great exposition if it destroyed all of San Francisco? Common sense. Just cultivate your common sense, as my dear friend John Knox says. So is there anything you want to add here, Santos? Okay, well, thanks you guys for listening. We're at 43 minutes, 44 minutes, and I'm sure we'll do another one here. And then in the comment sections, if there's anything you guys want us to elaborate on or want us to continue on, we'd be happy to further this, because Santos is a great library, and we need to tap into all this work that he's done and all this great knowledge he's assimilated over time. So thank you, Santos, and thank you, Mari, for backing us up here. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace, and love one another always. And folks, shine your light bright.